The Romans liked their rebellions the way they liked their roads: straight, numbered, and finished on schedule. Yet in Britain, they met a queen who had no intention of being neatly filed away. Boudica, queen of the Iceni tribe, became one of the most formidable figures in the resistance to the Roman Empire's brutal occupation of Britain. She didn't ride out alone, but with an alliance of angry communities, and her rebellion spread across Roman-occupied territory like a brush fire through dry thatch, fast, consuming, and very bad for anyone who preferred orderly paperwork. Welcome to Insights into History, Season 2, Episode 3, A Queen, a Grudge, and Chaos. The first to fall was Camulodunum, modern-day Colchester. The first Roman settlement established in Britain, a colonia planted as a declaration of permanence. Boudica's rebels destroyed it completely, striking a devastating blow to Roman pride and Roman power. Then the fury turned toward Londinium, modern-day London. At that time, Londinium was still a young town, its wooden buildings and hurried structures still carrying the smell of fresh-cut timber. The Roman governor understood, or at the very least appreciated, what was coming. So he fled. However, his absence did not save the place. The rebels sacked it and burned it to the ground. The final major target in Boudica's campaign was Verulamium, modern St. Albans. It too suffered the same fate, destruction, and death at the hands of Boudica's enraged forces. Two of the most important historical accounts of this revolt come from the Roman historians Tacitus and Cassius Dio. Each offers a different glimpse into the chaos that swept through Roman Britain, and each wrote about it at different periods of time. Tacitus, the more reliable contemporary-ish source, presents the rebel forces as relentless, uninterested in ransom, uninterested in prisoners. They had not risen to bargain with Rome. They had risen to destroy what Rome had built and to punish the empire for exploitation and humiliation. In Tacitus, vengeance is stronger than diplomacy, and the mood of the revolt is not negotiation, but reckoning. Cassius Dio, writing decades later, gives us a more vivid and dramatic portrait of Boudica herself. He describes her as tall, fierce, and loud, a woman who stood out not merely because she was present, but because she was impossible to ignore. He writes of a mass of tawny hair, an image of wild force and untamed energy. He remarks on a voice built for the battlefield, and with that single impression, he gives us not just physical power, but charisma, an authority capable of driving men forward into fire and iron. Boudica's rebellion was not simply a matter of military victories. It was resistance against a foreign empire, a struggle for independence. It was a fight for the dignity of her people. Tacitus and Dio, Roman though they were, write with a measure of awe at the strength and resilience of a woman who dared to rise against the most powerful empire in their world. However, the flames, the slaughter, and the broken masonry are only part of the story. The symbolic force of Boudica's defiance soon overshadowed the destruction itself. In a world where women were usually excluded from military leadership, her rise was extraordinary. She became the figurehead of a rebellion that was at once desperate and deeply personal, and in doing so she revealed the astonishing potential for unity among Britain's oppressed communities. The tragedy, of course, was that fierce leadership and terrible destruction didn't bring final victory. Boudica was ultimately defeated by the Roman military. The exact details of her death remain uncertain, but it is generally believed that she either died of illness or poisoned herself to avoid capture. Yet, defeat didn't erase her. Through the ages, Boudica endured as a symbol of resistance. She is remembered not only for military leadership, but for the spirit of defiance she came to represent, an enduring figure in the story of Britain's resistance to Roman rule. Her story reminds us that history is shaped not only by those who conquer, but by those who rise, however briefly, against oppression, even when the odds are very much, and quite rudely, stacked against them. Still, for all the drama of burning cities, and all the popular images of Londinium in flames, the true hinge of this story lies somewhere less theatrical. Not in the blaze, not in the sword, but in something more ordinary, more frustrating, and, in the Roman world, more powerful. Paperwork. In the Roman Empire, paperwork wasn't just administrative clutter. It was the machinery of control. The empire ruled through records of land ownership, imperial seals, contracts, wills, lists of taxes, lists of tribute. This paper trail was the foundation of Roman authority. It justified expansion. It maintained dominance. It kept subject populations under control. Sure, Rome conquered with legions, but it kept what it conquered through administration. So the incident that set off the Iceni rebellion wasn't only a spontaneous eruption of violence. It was a calculated disregard for the legal and cultural norms that governed the relationship between Rome and its client kings. A dispute over property and authority became an explosive conflict. The story begins with what seems, at first glance, almost drearily administrative: the death of a client king. A man expected to act as intermediary between Rome and the local tribes. That man was Prasutagus, king of the Iceni, in what is now modern East Anglia. Prasutagus had long been loyal to Rome. As was customary, his kingdom was expected to pass to his heirs in accordance with the terms of his will. But his will was ignored. Instead of respecting the late king's wishes and allowing his heirs to inherit, Roman authorities annexed the Iceni lands. What followed wasn't just administrative neglect. It was seizure. The semi-autonomous Iceni kingdom, which had endured under Prasutagus, was absorbed into the imperial system. Its land, its wealth, its resources, all of it folded into Rome. For the Iceni, this wasn't just betrayal of one man's will. It was a revelation. It showed what alliance with Rome truly meant. It meant that your lands could be taken, your sovereignty overruled, your people subjected not necessarily by a charging army, but by decisions written down somewhere far away by men who would never have to look you in the eye. It's here that the word alliance begins to rot. For Rome, an alliance was not mutual partnership. It was a colonial arrangement, a way of drawing new peoples into the imperial fold under the appearance of shared interest. To the Iceni, it became clear that this was alliance in name only. Once Prasutagus died and his will was disregarded, the supposed partnership dissolved, revealing Rome's true intention: control, exploitation, annexation. This moment in history, the death of a client king, the rejection of his will, the annexation of his kingdom, is where paperwork comes into focus as the true catalyst of the conflict. The legal documents surrounding the Iceni, the decrees that enabled annexation, the administrative decisions of Roman officials, these mattered as much as any skirmish, maybe even more. Rome's power lay not only in its legions, but in the machinery that extended authority across vast territories. For conquered peoples, Roman control was often felt not first through soldiers, but through the quiet power of documents, the paper that stripped autonomy away, the laws that decided whose land was whose, essentially the edicts that dictated the terms of life under empire. When Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium were destroyed, those fires were the outward sign of something deeper. A rebellion driven not only by occupation, but by betrayal. By the Roman disregard for local sovereignty, the seizure of the Iceni kingdom, which shattered whatever illusions of honor still clung to the relationship between Rome and its client kingdoms. In this light, Boudica's revolt becomes not only a story of military resistance, but of legal and cultural rupture. It's a fight against bureaucracy and the invisible, quiet machinery of empire, such as edicts, taxes, legal forms, and the authority to erase a people with the turn of a page in a ledger. At the heart of the revolt lay not merely land or wealth, but agency. For the Iceni, alliance proved to be an empty promise, and the paperwork that had once framed their relationship with Rome became the very tool used to justify exploitation. A king's will ignored became the spark for a war of survival. In the end, the rebellion was not only for territory. It was for recognition. For the right to define one's own destiny outside the reach of an empire that could use paper to erase cultures and reshape history. Boudica was queen of the Iceni, a powerful tribe in what is now East Anglia, in the eastern part of Britain. In AD 60 or 61, She became the leader of one of the largest recorded uprisings against Roman rule in Britain, an event that shook the foundations of Rome's control over the province. It remains one of the greatest challenges Rome ever faced in its occupied territories, and it reveals at once Boudica's strength and Rome's vulnerability. Yet much about her life remains uncertain. We don't know her birth date. Her death is generally placed around AD 60 or 61, but that dating is inferred from the broader Roman timeline, particularly the governorship of Suetonius Paulinus, the Roman general who eventually defeated her. Even that is not precision. It's reconstruction. The best guess that can be made from the surviving context, rather than a firmly documented moment. The truly unfortunate part is that we don't have her voice. No speeches. No letters. No diary. No personal account. No moment in which she leaves behind some private line saying, in effect, "Dear diary, today I burned a Roman colony, and it felt amazing." History denied us that particular treasure. Everything we know comes through Roman authors, and Roman authors wrote with Roman priorities for Roman audiences. The story of Boudica reaches us through the lens of empire. Her portrayal was not necessarily an effort to understand her, or even to record her fairly. It was often moral instruction, political warning, rhetorical theater, depending on the author and the moment. The two main sources are Tacitus and Cassius Dio. They are invaluable, but they are also limited. Tacitus, writing in the 1st century, is often treated as the more grounded of the two. But he was still Roman, still shaped by the political world of his time. His writing is not neutral. It's inflected by Roman assumptions, Roman bias, Roman power. He gives us some of the most reliable details we possess, and he gives them to us as a Roman. Cassius Dio, writing later in the 2nd century, presents a more dramatic, more embellished account. He's useful, often strikingly so, but handled with more caution. He likes theater, grandeur, and speeches. When history is filtered through that instinct, begins to wear a little more makeup than strict accuracy prefers. The challenge, then, is that everything we know about Boudica is filtered. We have the broad outline: rebellion, destruction, defeat, the fall of a queen. But that outline was painted by Roman hands. When people ask, who is Boudica, really, the honest answer is this: we can outline what is most likely, using Roman texts and the historical context they preserve. But we can't interview her. We can't ask what she thought of Rome, what she feared, what she hoped, what she felt as she led her people into battle. We can't always tell when we are hearing Boudica and when we are hearing a Roman author doing, as it were, a Boudica voice for rhetorical effect. Her story therefore runs on 2 tracks at once. The first is the timeline, the events themselves as best they can be reconstructed, the revolt, the campaign, the battles, the aftermath. The second is the filter, the Roman lens through which those events were seen, and the later myth-making that repainted that lens again and again. Depending on the teller, Boudica becomes a barbarian terror devastating Roman settlements, or a noble defender of her people, or a national symbol of resistance, or a billboard onto which later generations paste their own ideas of courage and rebellion. The emotional tone changes with the telling. In Roman accounts, she's often a threat to order. In modern retellings, she becomes heroic, nationally proud, defiantly female, magnificently resistant. But each version reflects the needs of the era that tells it. That is the complexity of Boudica's legacy. The story isn't only about the revolt. It's also about how the revolt has been told. Her rebellion is real. What she did, what she represented, and the impact of that resistance against Roman oppression are undeniable. But the Boudica most people know, the one found in stories, films, statues, and schoolbooks, has been shaped over centuries by interpretation. Her story matters not simply because she won or lost, but because it shows how narratives are formed, how history is told, and what is lost in the telling. The absence of her own voice forces us to rely on interpretations passed down through Roman cultural filters and the later needs of other ages. In the end, Boudica's story isn't only about a queen leading a revolt. It's about how difficult it is to ever fully know those who lived on the edges of the empire, and how readily their lives are remade into legend. The truth of who she was may never be recovered in full, but her place in history remains as powerful as the resistance she led. Some basics, however, are solid. Boudica was married to Prasutagus, king of the Iceni, a people living in what is now East Anglia in modern-day England. As Tacitus describes them, the Iceni were a client kingdom of Rome. Formally allied to the empire, governed locally, allowed a measure of autonomy, but expected, always, to obey Roman authority. In theory, the arrangement was one of mutual respect and cooperation. Then Prasutagus died. As often happens with empires, what had been called alliance became ownership. Tacitus frames the spark of rebellion in legal terms through the collapse of the norms surrounding Prasutagus's will. Trying to protect his family and preserve peace with Rome, the king left half his estate to the emperor and half to his daughters. It was a balancing act, part accommodation, part preservation. A final effort to satisfy Roman interests while securing the future of his own household. Roman officials ignored it. Rather than honoring his wishes, they seized the opportunity for annexation. Rome moved swiftly to take control of Iceni lands, confiscate property, and punish the local elite who had not shown complete submission. What had been intended as a cautious peace became exploitation. As a result, autonomy vanished almost at once. Tacitus then gives us the most brutal detail of all. Boudica was flogged publicly and her daughters were sexually assaulted. This was not merely punishment. It was humiliation. It was meant to break a family, and through that family, a people. A queen and a mother was violated in public view, and the empire expected obedience to continue as before. Instead, the rage became uncontainable. The flogging of Boudica and the assault on her daughters are often treated as the turning point, the moment when humiliation passed beyond endurance and fury became revolt. Her suffering became the spark that lit the fire, drawing oppressed tribes together under her banner. It wasn't just the loss of wealth or territory that drove the uprising. It was the violation of dignity. Even her name carries both meaning and uncertainty. Boudica is often connected to a Celtic root meaning victory, frequently embellished as victorious woman. That interpretation fits neatly, almost too neatly with her later legend as a symbol of resistance. Yet scholars remain cautious. The manuscript tradition is messy. The exact form and meaning of the name are uncertain. We can't say with confidence exactly how she herself would have rendered it in her own language. But whatever name she bore in life, later generations bound it tightly to victory. Rome's invasion of Britain in AD 43 had begun a systematic campaign of subjugation. Implementation of forts, roads, taxation, and the cultivation of a cooperative local elite who could benefit under Roman rule. For some, cooperation with Rome meant wealth and advancement. For others, particularly those dispossessed, it meant marginalization and loss. The Iceni stood among the peoples who learned that Roman friendship could prove very expensive indeed. Tacitus presents these developments as a clash of cultures, and the collapse of the norms surrounding Prasutagus will as the final insult. The alliance had always been fragile. His death exposed just how conditional it was. Once it no longer suited Rome, that alliance vanished. The result was not simply conquest. It was betrayal. So the revolt that followed was not just a tale of military upheaval. It was the story of broken trust, of a people forced under an empire, and of a queen who watched her family's dignity and authority trampled under Roman rule. What began as administrative and legal abuse unleashed one of the most devastating uprisings in Roman Britain. When we turn to Cassius Dio, writing later than Tacitus, the emphasis shifts. Tacitus focuses heavily on personal brutality and legal collapse. Dio leans further into economics. In his telling, the rebellion was not only a personal vendetta against Roman mistreatment. It was also about economic exploitation, the confiscation of land and property, the burdens of taxation, the extraction of wealth from local communities. What Rome called alliance, Dio allows us to see as a revenue system. These alliances with local rulers, in practice, were mechanisms for subjugation and resource extraction. Mutual agreements became pipelines of imperial income. The conquered were compelled to help pay for their own conquest. Beneath the politics and the pageantry, that injustice mattered. The contrast between Tacitus and Dio reflects more than two different personalities. It reflects two different Roman ways of understanding the same disaster. Tacitus, closer to the events, sees a legal and moral breakdown. Dio, later, sees the machinery of exploitation more starkly. In the end, both point to the same safest conclusion: legal violation, economic oppression, and humiliating violence stacked together until the whole structure burst. Boudica's revolt wasn't a single flash of anger. It was the result of accumulated pressure. Timing mattered too, of course. At the moment the uprising took shape, the Roman governor, Gaius Suetonius Paulinus, was away on campaign at Mona, modern Anglesey, an island strongly associated in Roman writings with the Druids. Mona was presented as a strategic and symbolic center of Druidic resistance, and Paulinus was engaged there against local Celtic religious leadership, which Rome viewed as a threat. His absence created an opening. With Roman forces occupied elsewhere, especially in the southeast, Boudica and her allies saw their chance. Roman control was weakened. Towns were exposed. Authority was thin on the ground. So it wasn't just anger that fueled the rebellion. It was anger meeting opportunity. Oppression had supplied the grievance. Timing supplied the opening. That combination of systemic exploitation, personal trauma, and a rare moment of vulnerability made Boudica's revolt different. It was not simply an emotional reaction to one wrong. It was years of mistreatment, suddenly finding a crack in the armor of empire. When a people pushed toward the edge find the right moment to act, history can move very quickly indeed. Tacitus and Cassius Dio both make an essential point from the beginning. This wasn't some isolated incident, such as a tavern brawl that got dramatically out of hand. It was a massive, coordinated uprising, a broad movement spreading rapidly across the region, powered by many grievances at once. Multiple tribes, each with their own reasons for fury, converged in sudden revolt. Dio in particular stresses the importance of Paulinus's absence. The governor was away on campaign, leaving the southeast vulnerable. The Roman chain of command had a gap in it, and into that gap poured rebellion. Tacitus, from his own Roman perspective, also depicts the uprising as a multi-stage catastrophe. Not one attack, but a sequence of devastating blows that kept the Roman authorities off balance and unable to contain the revolt in its earliest phase. At the center stood the Iceni, led by Boudica. The immediate crisis began with them, with their betrayal, their dispossession, the seizure of their lands and wealth. But they did not stand alone for long. Tacitus specifically names the Trinovants as important partners in the revolt, and their reasons were deeply personal. Camulodunum had become the home of a Roman veteran colony, a settlement of retired soldiers, armed in practice, if not always in uniform, often carrying themselves as men entitled to land and obedience. These veterans hadn't come merely to retire quietly. They had come to possess. Local communities were expected to accept their authority. Then there was the Temple of Claudius. Tacitus describes it as a glaring symbol of permanent domination. To Rome, perhaps a monument. To the Britons, a declaration. If one wanted a single building to say, "Rome is here forever," the Temple of Claudius did the job splendidly. Too splendidly, apparently. Britain at this time was not a unified nation in any modern sense. It was a patchwork of tribes, client kingdoms, rival factions, local elites, old feuds, and new humiliations. No common central government existed. No single military chain of command organized the armies. People didn't think of themselves as citizens of some unified Britain. Their loyalties were primarily tribal in nature. So when revolt came, it didn't resemble a modern national war. It looked instead like a convergence of grievances, different tribes, different injuries, one shared enemy. Rome had provided that enemy with extraordinary motivation. A veteran colony, a hated temple, debt, confiscations, humiliation, taxation. There were numerous reasons for anger towards Rome, and they were widely distributed. These groups didn't need to agree on a grand ideological manifesto. They simply needed a target. Rome supplied one. Yet the coalition was not perfectly unified. Tacitus and Dio both show momentum, terror, speed, but neither describes a stable state project with durable institutions behind it. This wasn't a well-oiled machine. It was a rapidly escalating alliance of fury. A storm front, perhaps, is the better image. Separate systems including tribal grievance, Roman oppression, and military opportunity colliding until the pressure broke and violence surged forward under its own force. Once it began, it moved fast, burned hot, and proved difficult to control. The rebellion of Boudica and the Iceni reminds us that history is often less tidy than later storytelling prefers. It wasn't simply anger. It was circumstance, injustice, timing, and chance aligning for one extraordinary moment against empire. Camulodunum, modern Colchester, was far more than a settlement. It was a statement. As a colonia, it had been founded specifically for Roman veterans, meant to project permanence and Roman authority. It wasn't only a military outpost. It was a display case of conquest, a way of saying the empire had put down roots and expected to remain. To Romans, such a settlement represented order. To local Britons, it felt less like a peaceful retirement village and more like an occupation with masonry. A trophy built on their land, full of men who believed victory entitled them to property and obedience. Tacitus places particular emphasis on the Temple of Claudius. Massive, costly, and impossible to miss, it stood not just as architecture, but as imperial theology made stone. To the Britons, it wasn't just a foreign temple. It was a reminder of conquest, permanent, expensive, and planted in their landscape like an insult that had hired an architect. For all its symbolism, Camulodunum had a fatal weakness. It was poorly defended. Tacitus presents it as a soft target. That failure was not only strategic. It was psychological. The Romans had believed that a colony of veterans and a giant monument to empire would frighten rebellion into submission. Instead, they had built the most obvious target in Britain. When Boudica's forces attacked, the result was swift and devastating. Tacitus tells us there was no pause for negotiation. The settlement was looted and burned. Romans took refuge in the Temple of Claudius, imagining, perhaps, that symbols of power would make satisfactory fortifications. For 2 days they held out. Then the temple fell. The fall of Camulodunum matters because it combines symbolic impact with tactical vulnerability. The great emblem of Roman authority in Britain became the site of one of the greatest blows ever dealt to that authority. The seriousness of the crisis became unmistakable when Rome attempted relief. The governor brought in a detachment of the 9th Legion, but Tacitus reports that the Britons routed it. Heavy Roman casualties followed. The infantry were slaughtered. The detachment's commander Suetonius Cerealis escaped only with his cavalry, and only by retreating behind fortifications. That is no minor riot. That is no local disturbance. That is a Roman legionary force struck down in the field by rebels who had achieved not only fury, but coordination. The attack on Camulodunum was thus more than a local episode. It was a strategic blow to Roman imperial structure in Britain, and it became a rallying point for others who had grievances of their own. The destruction of the city challenged not merely Rome's buildings, but Rome's assumption that its authority was secure. Symbolism plus vulnerability made impact. And impact, in this case, came wrapped in fire. Once a colonia falls, a temple is stormed, and a relief force is smashed, the message outruns every courier in Britain. Rome can bleed here. That realization changes everything. If Rome can bleed, then Rome can be opposed. If Rome can be opposed, then others, subjugated, taxed, humiliated, displaced, may decide to pick up the knife as well. Tacitus gives us a telling description of Londinium. It wasn't yet a formal colonia, not yet that full civic badge of Roman permanence. But it was already a major commercial center, crowded with merchants, traders, travelers. It mattered enormously to the functioning of the province. It was one of the arteries through which Roman Britain breathed. So to lose Londinium was to lose more than a town. It was to lose circulation. When Suetonius Paulinus arrived, he confronted a harsh military truth. His forces were too few. He couldn't defend Londinium and still preserve an army capable of containing the wider revolt. Tacitus does not romanticize the choice. It was triage. Paulinus wisely withdrew his forces from the city. He took with him those who could escape. He left the rest. The city was sacrificed so that the army might survive. Buildings, wealth, and people on one side of the equation. A field army, the last instrument of Roman control, on the other. It wasn't heroic. It was strategic. Still the rebels came. Londinium was looted, burned, and those unable to escape were massacred. The city fell despite Roman withdrawal, and in falling it became not only a physical loss, but a symbolic one. Roman authority, once assumed to be firm, had become visibly fragile. The destruction of Londinium was not simply an emotional outburst. It reflected momentum, practicality, and opportunity. The rebels knew where Roman power lived, and they struck at it. A city vital to commerce, governance, and imperial confidence was reduced to ash. The myth of Roman invulnerability had already been cracked at Camulodunum. At Londinium, that crack widened. And once an empire's aura of inevitability begins to fail, events can move with frightening speed. Tacitus and Cassius Dio give us literary accounts of destruction, especially in Londinium. Archaeology offers something quieter, but no less compelling, the physical remains of catastrophe. In early Roman London, excavations have revealed a destructive burn horizon, often called the Boudican destruction layer. Thick deposits of burned debris and charred materials point to a major destructive fire event. The London Museum has drawn attention to this layer, noting that the debris is consistent with large-scale burning. However, for all its authority, archaeology comes with one stubborn limitation. It doesn't come with name tags. One can't point to every charred beam and say, with theatrical certainty, Boudica herself did this. Archaeology gives us timing, scale, and pattern. It doesn't give us signatures. What it can do is corroborate. It tells us that a major fire event took place at the right time, in the right place, on a scale that matches the literary descriptions. Tacitus and Dio tell us Londinium was abandoned and then destroyed. The archaeological evidence suggests a major fire consistent with exactly such an episode. While we can't attach every scorch mark directly to Boudica by name, the match between text and earth is convincing. Scholars routinely connect this destruction layer to the revolt, while still preserving the proper academic caution. In that sense, archaeology doesn't provide a perfect fingerprint. It provides something nearly as valuable, a strong alignment of time, place, and violence. While Tacitus and Dio give us the story, archaeology gives us the burn marks. The burned remains of early Roman London show that the flames in the literary accounts were no mere rhetorical flourish. If you zoom out and look at the uprising after the first shocks, a pattern snaps into focus. This wasn't just anger spilling over in random directions. It moved like a front. First Camulodunum, then Londinium, and then a third place that mattered deeply to the Roman project in Britain, Verulamium, what we now call St. Albans. Tacitus doesn't linger over Verulamium the way he does the earlier disasters, and that shorter treatment actually tells you something. He's grouping it into the same catastrophe. Same kind of target, same kind of outcome. The rebels weren't trying to crack the toughest forts on the map. They were going after places that were wealthy, exposed, and unmistakably Roman in their look and function. If you want to break an empire's grip, you don't always start with its strongest walls. You hit the spots that broadcast authority every day. And then Tacitus drops the number that's meant to make your stomach turn. Across Camulodunum, Londinium, and Verulamium, he says around 70,000 people were killed. That's his figure, not a modern audit. But as a piece of storytelling, it does what he wants it to do. It tells the reader, this has crossed a line. Whatever began as rebellion now looks like mass killing and the rapid destruction of urban life on a scale that could make Rome wonder whether it was about to lose a province. Verulamium makes sense as a target even without the special symbolism of Camulodunum's temple and veteran colony. It was a municipium of a Roman-style town, tied into commerce and wealth, shaped by the new order. To the rebels, it would have looked like another bright marker of occupation and collaboration. Burning it wasn't only about destroying property. It was about broadcasting a message in smoke. Your cities can fall too. Your forever is not guaranteed. Now here's where the story gets a little more complicated, because archaeology is less dramatic than ancient prose and often more cautious. Early Roman towns in Britain used a lot of timber. Timber burns. And fires can start for all sorts of reasons that have nothing to do with rebellion. Crowded neighborhoods, workshops, cooking, accidents, plain bad luck. That timeless human tradition of putting the hot thing too close to the flammable thing. At Verulamium, some digs have uncovered dark, ashy layers that fit a major fire event. Other excavations show destruction that looks more patchy, more localized. Scholars debate how fully the town was devastated and whether every district suffered equally. The important point isn't that archaeology debunks Tacitus. It's that archaeology doesn't let anyone draw every street corner with confidence. It can often tell you something big happened. It can't always tell you exactly how it unfolded block by block. Still, when you step back, the larger shape holds. Tacitus places Verulamium in the list of destroyed cities. Archaeology, while careful, supports the likelihood of a major destructive episode in the right place and time. And taken together, the picture is not of scattered unrest. It looks like a fast-moving wave of urban catastrophe tearing through Roman Britain. The revolt hit hard, and it hit quickly. Rome felt it. But once cities burn, the question changes. Destruction is one thing. Winning is another. An uprising can terrify an empire without actually defeating it. And that's where both Tacitus and Cassius Dio steer us next, toward the final confrontation, the moment when the revolt has to face Roman military reality head-on. The problem is, they don't hand us a neat map. Tacitus gives us terrain features. Dio gives us drama. Neither gives us a pin you can drop on a modern GPS. Historians often call it the Battle of Watling Street, because it makes sense that armies would move along major routes and because the descriptions loosely match certain landscapes. But the truth is, nobody can stand on a specific hill and say, with certainty, this is the spot. It's an educated reconstruction, not a confirmed address. What we do get from Tacitus is a classic battlefield setup, Suetonius Paulinus choosing ground that turns the fight into something the Romans can control. A narrow approach, like a bottleneck, with woods behind the Roman line. That choice matters. It limits the rebels' ability to surround the legions. It restricts movement. It forces the battle to happen in a way that rewards discipline and punished chaos. This is Roman warfare as a system. Reduce uncertainty, reduce angles of attack, make the enemy's numerical advantage less usable. Tacitus also tells us the rebels came in overflowing with confidence. Confident enough, he says, that they set wagons along the edges of the field, bringing families and spectators. They weren't just hoping for victory. They were expecting it, like it was an event already decided. And those wagons become one of the cruel turning points in the story. Because once the fighting shifted, the wagons turned the edge of the field into a trap. Retreat becomes congestion. Escape routes narrow. A battlefield turns into a bottleneck of panicked movement. What looked like a victory parade route becomes a fatal traffic jam. Tacitus isn't only writing military history here. He's writing a Roman lesson. In his telling, the legions are order, training, discipline, control. The rebels are courage and fury, but also vulnerability to disorder when the momentum breaks. Underneath the narrative is a claim that Rome wins because Rome deserves to win. That's the moral architecture holding his version together. Cassius Dio agrees with the broad outcome, a climactic fight, bitter combat, a Roman victory. But Dio is Dio. He loves grand speeches and theatrical flourishes. Those speeches can tell us what Romans liked to imagine about courage and leadership, but they're not courtroom transcripts. Ancient historians often compose speeches to sharpen the meaning of events and to make the story hit harder. However you weigh their styles, the conclusion is the same. Rome wins. The revolt is crushed. The organized resistance collapses. And with that, Boudica's coalition begins to come apart under the pressure that follows defeat. After the battle, There's no long epilogue where everyone drifts into retirement and history continues politely in the background. The ending is abrupt and brutal because that's often how failed revolts end. Communities try to survive. Rome reasserts control, and Boudica herself disappears from the record almost as quickly as she entered it. Our sources don't even agree on how she died. Tacitus gives a hard line. She took poison. Cassius Dio says she fell sick and died, and he adds that the Britons mourned her and gave her an expensive burial. Different causes, different emotional tone, but the essential point is the same. She died soon after the final battle, and once she was gone, the uprising lost its center of gravity. The strangest detail might be what we can't locate at all: her grave. Tacitus doesn't mention it. Dio gestures toward a burial, but provides no place. That silence creates a vacuum, and people hate vacuums. Over centuries, traditions attach her burial to dramatic locations: Stonehenge, King's Cross, places that feel like they ought to hold a legend. But evidence? Nothing solid. And that uncertainty becomes part of her power. A missing grave is an open invitation for myth. Meanwhile, Rome does what empires do after a scare. It conducts a cold internal review. Tacitus gives us something that feels almost modern in its logic. Not mourning, not soul-searching. A practical question: what went wrong, and how do we stop it happening again? That tone is revealing. Once the emergency passed, Rome's priority wasn't emotional reckoning. It was function. Rebuild what needs rebuilding. Punish what needs punishing. Get the province producing again. File the disaster under solved. Tacitus even takes us into the political conflict behind this recalibration. Two Roman officials clash over what solved should look like. Julius Classicianus, the new procurator, argues that Suetonius Paulinus is dragging out instability by continuing the war with what Tacitus calls a winner's rage. In other words, you're not securing the province, you're keeping it on fire. Paulinus, the general who fought and won, leans toward more punishment. Classicianus leans toward restraint, accepting surrender, stabilizing, and waiting for a new governor who can reset the situation. This matters because it shows empire thinking in costs. Tacitus basically admits a hard truth: you cannot govern ashes forever. If you destroy too much, the province stops paying. Trade collapses, agriculture suffers, revenue dries up. Empires may speak in grand ideals, but they also count receipts. And after a revolt like this, the missing receipts become impossible to ignore. So Nero sends an investigator, Polyclitus, to assess the situation. It's a signal that Rome is adjusting course. Suetonius, effective in war, is replaced by someone more careful, more suited to restoring order without lighting the fuse again. Rome doesn't suddenly become humane. It becomes better calibrated. Enough punishment to deter, enough rebuilding to profit, enough restraint to prevent another explosion. That ability to adjust is one of the reasons Roman rule lasted. Not because Rome was gentle, but because it could tweak the blend of coercion and administration when the numbers got ugly. And here's one of the great ironies: Boudica survives in our histories largely because her enemies' books survived. We don't have her letters. We don't have her side of the story in her own words. We have Tacitus and Cassius Dio, elite Roman men, writing for Roman audiences, shaped by Roman priorities. And their works made it through the long, fragile chain of copying and preservation. If those manuscripts had vanished, Boudica might have faded into local memory as a rumor at the edge of conquest. Instead, because they endured, she endured. Then, centuries later, she returns in a different form. In Tudor and Elizabethan England, scholars revive classical texts and Boudica re-enters the conversation. And almost immediately she gets paired, sometimes loosely, with Elizabeth I, a woman ruler, a nation under threat, leadership in a world that doubts female authority. The comparison isn't perfect, but politics rarely demands perfect. It demands useful. By the 19th century, another transformation. Boudica becomes a national symbol, reinterpreted through Victorian ideas about Britain, destiny, and empire. The most famous artifact of that era is the statue by Thomas Thornycroft, Boadicea, and her daughters, set near Westminster Bridge. It shows her in a dramatic chariot, her daughters beside her, and it does more than honor a figure from the past. It claims her. It places a defeated rebel next to the heart of government and turns her into part of national identity. And once you see that, you start noticing the pattern. Every era remakes her. Elizabethan thinkers can use her as a mirror for a queen. Victorians can use her as an emblem of national spirit. Modern audiences can cast her in multiple ways at once: a hero of resistance, a warning about revolt's violence, an anti-imperial icon, a tragic figure whose campaign brought horrific suffering to civilians. Sometimes she's framed as all of these things in the same breath. That flexibility is telling. Boudica becomes a kind of historical mirror. People look into her story and see what they're worried about right now: empire, occupation, identity, women in power, righteous anger, the ethics of force, the cost of vengeance. Modern scholarship often focuses not only on what happened in AD 60 or 61, but on this afterlife, how her image gets repainted in poems, paintings, speeches, statues, television, popular history, and yes, in audio shows like this one. The historical Boudica is difficult to recover. The cultural Boudica is everywhere. Underneath all the later symbolism, there's a harder, colder reading of the revolt. It was also a system's failure for Rome. The empire's usual tools, confiscation, humiliation, extraction, violence, didn't maintain order here. They manufactured rebellion. Rome wasn't defeated because it lacked power. It was nearly defeated because it used power in ways that made revolt a rational choice for the people it tried to rule. Tacitus lays out the trigger with brutal clarity. After Prasutagus died, Roman agents absorbed the kingdom, seized property, dispossessed leading men, and publicly shattered local authority. Boudica was flogged. Her daughters were raped. Whether every detail can be verified the way we demand today, the point Tacitus is making is unmistakable. Humiliation and extraction weren't side effects. They were the method. And when you strip local elites of dignity and security, you turn the people best positioned to keep the peace into the people most motivated to break it. Tacitus emphasizes how grievances converged, especially among the Iceni and Trinovans, into a larger coalition. That convergence helps explain the speed. This wasn't a single spark in isolation. It was resentment finding common cause, and when it did, it moved fast: Camulodunum, Londinium, Verulamium. The province nearly slipped out of Rome's hands because Rome's own reflexes gave the revolt its fuel. Afterward, Rome adjusted, not out of kindness, but because the costs were undeniable. Cities were gone. Revenue vanished. Troops and time were consumed. Credibility took a hit. So the empire recalibrated its governance, trying to keep Britain productive and obedient without provoking another firestorm. So what do we take from all of this? Boudica's revolt becomes a lesson in legitimacy. When legitimacy collapses, protest can harden into insurgency. When insurgency takes hold, the costs explode: lives, cities, wealth, stability, confidence. And even when the rebellion is defeated, the story doesn't end. It continues as memory and symbol, reopened and repurposed by later generations who need it to mean something new. There's one last complication we should sit with. History doesn't always belong to the winners, but it's very often filed by them. Rome won the battle, preserved control, and kept the surviving written record. Tacitus and Dio don't just tell us what happened, they tell us what Rome wanted readers to learn from what happened. Rome is order. Rebels are chaos. Roman discipline defeats tribal fury. That framing isn't neutral. It's explanation and it's propaganda at the same time. So anytime we revisit Boudica, we're hearing two stories layered on top of each other. One is the story in Britain, a revolt born of humiliation and abuse, a campaign that burned major towns, a coalition led by a queen who, for a moment, made empire tremble. The other is Rome's story about Britain, a morality tale about why rebellion fails and why Rome still deserves to rule. Boudica lives in the tension between those two versions. Queen of the Iceni, wife of Prasutagus, mother, victim of Roman brutality, leader of one of the largest uprisings against Rome in Britain. A name tied to burning cities, to mass death, to resistance, to warning, to legend. Behind the prose, behind the statues, behind the ash layers and the missing grave, there's the uncomfortable core. A woman we can't fully recover, a rebellion we can trace, but cannot hear in its own voice, and an empire that learned, for one scorching moment, that even empires can be made to shake. Thanks for listening. We'll catch you on the next episode.